when we set goals, like we should be thinking in terms of what's the outcome goal? I want to win a championship. I want to run a marathon. I want to deadlift 600 pounds. Then what are the process goals, right? I want to execute these workouts. I want to show up at practice. I want to develop these skills. And then what are the person goals? So I want to confront my fear of failure is a person goal.
All right, folks, we've got Brad Stulberg back on the podcast today. For those that don't know Brad, he is an internationally known performance coach and the best-selling author of some great books like Master of Change and The Way of Excellence. He's been on this podcast before, episodes 333 and 334. We'll put the links there in the details of this episode. He's also best friends and co-authors with Steve Magnus. They've got a podcast called Excellence, actually. I listen to that one frequently. And they've got a blog called The Growth Equation. I love their research-based approach to performance. Now, in today's episode, we're going to unpack quite a few things. How, first off, important it is to still be talking about outcomes, not just being all about the process. We're going to talk about how important it is to rewarding effort, not just results. The importance of clear roles, understanding key motivators of our athletes, the 3 types of goals and the importance of each, how to build good support around your athletes, and what to do when you as a leader, as a coach, feel disconnected from your purpose. It's going to be a fantastic conversation today, as well as our next episode. So welcome back to the Coaching Culture Podcast. For those that don't know, my name is JP Nurbit, and I'm joined by my co-host, Betsy Butterick. The mission of this podcast is to help you to become a better leader, better coach, and build a better team culture. To get the notes to this podcast and the follow-up activities for you to implement yourself or with your team, you got to subscribe to the Team Culture Toolbox. You can do that at tocculture.com. You'll also get our weekly article there. Also, check out Betsy, her blog, and her book, Kids These Days. The feedback has been incredible. It's an unbelievable book. You can check that all out at betsybutterick.com. Now let's get right into today's conversation with Brad Stulberg.
Brad, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. I know this is a conversation that both JP and I have been looking forward to for a long time, especially with your upcoming book, The Way of Excellence. And I remember when I first read that title, I was like, okay, what can Brad teach us that's new about excellence? And that's part of why I'm so excited to read the book. When you're talking about The Way of Excellence, you framed excellence as that intersection of mastery and mattering. Can you say more about how you arrived at that framework?
Yeah. First, I think we should define the terms. So I think about mastery is making concrete progress toward worthwhile goals that you can trace back to yourself. So it's developing skill in a way that is very objective. And anyone that has ever trained for something or learned a new language or taken up an instrument or mastered a game like chess knows viscerally, like in your body, the fulfillment that you get from starting at point A, working really hard at something, and then getting to point B and maybe point C, D, E, and F on the journey. And that's just such a satisfying feeling that we humans crave. And the second component of excellence is mattering, which means that you've got to feel like you are connected to something beyond just yourself. Now, sometimes this can be a big, ambitious project, such as running for city council or being a research scientist that's trying to come up with some sort of an incredible cure. But this connection can also be much smaller. It can be as simple as being in a lineage of other craftspeople that have worked on the same skill, being in a team, being in a community of people that work toward a similar goal. And the mattering can even be how the process of trying to become excellence works on yourself as a person. So I think often we think about excellence as getting really good at something. But while you're getting really good at something, you're also becoming, hopefully, a better, more thoughtful, stronger, skillful version of yourself. So you could just work on deadlifting, picking up weight off the ground alone in your basement for a year. But if you do it with intention and concentration, the process of working on that deadlift, of confronting your fears, of failing, of recovering from those failures, of succeeding, that's going to make you a better person that then hopefully you can carry with you into all these other realms of your life. And that's how I got this combination of mastery and mattering.
When you think about these concepts, mastery and mattering, how do they connect to team sports versus maybe more individual sports? I know that you guys write a lot about individual sports like running, You've also done some work in team context, but I'm just wondering what does that intersection between mastery and mattering, how does that play within a team context?
I think in a team context, the mattering tends to be more built in many ways, because you're part of a brotherhood or a sisterhood of other athletes that are striving together and that are going through these ups and downs together. And your individual contribution, your effort on that day, uh, it inherently impacts more than you. It impacts the team. So part of what makes team sports so special is that it is this like really pure bastion of mattering in a world that is increasingly chaotic and frenetic and digital. And when you step onto the court or the field with a group of other men or women, like that is so real. And of course, you're going to feel a sense of mattering. Um, I think that team sports are wonderful for that. I think in an individual context, sometimes the mattering can be a little bit harder to come by in a sporting context, but I really do think that even if you're working on an individual sport, to the extent it's possible, if you can train with other people or be connected to other people that are undergoing that same process, you get mattering. And like I said, even in this hypothetical world, which I hope no one does, if you lock yourself alone and you just train by yourself and you don't even see another person for an entire year, the process of giving your all to a goal is going to hopefully shape you as a better person in other realms of your life. I think so often we think that we're training for the sport, and we are, but the sport is also training us to be a better partner, a better friend, a better parent, a better community member, so on and so forth.
And JP, you asked about team sports, and I want to continue the thread there, specifically with the mattering part. Knowing that in many team sports, especially with today's athletes, if they're not getting consistent competitive opportunities, or if their skill set isn't yet at the level that allows them to compete, to chase that kind of excellence, specifically the performance outcomes related to that, how can we be intentional as coaches, as leaders, to ensure that those that aren't having the competitive opportunities or seeing the success still feel like they matter?
Yeah, I think that it obviously depends on the level that we're talking about here. So it's going to be a big difference on a 10U youth sports team versus a high school team versus a collegiate team versus a professional team. Um, I think that what is in common across all those categories is that even someone that might not be at the skill level where they're contributing to the objective performance markers, if they can have a role on the team where they are contributing and they see that in a very concrete way. So that role could be on the practice squad, and really showing up and giving your all at practice to help the individuals that are going to get more playing time see different schemes. That role could be a sense of humor in the locker room. That role could be a sort of attitude that is just effervescent and spreads to the other players on the team. So even though you might never contribute a goal or a pitch, you do contribute the sense of energy that everyone can feel. And I think that what's so important for a coach in this situation is to get really clear that it is everyone on the team has a role and everyone on that team is contributing. And those roles are going to change over the course of a season. And for an athlete, those roles are going to change over the course of a career. I mean, every single athlete has been in sporting environments where they're not contributing in an objective performance context and where they are, based on the talent around them, based on their own development trajectory. Um, so I think it's the coach's job to help kind of athletes see that yes, there are those more objective contributions, but then there's the softer contributions. And I think also just asking every athlete like what drives you. I mean, that is so important at all levels of sport. And especially for like youth, right? Some kids are going to say, I just want to have fun. Some kids are going to say, I just want to hang out with my friends. Other kids are going to say, I want to win. I'd love to compete. And all of those are valid answers. But for the kid that just wants to have fun, he or she might not give a damn if they're playing at all. And as a coach, like your job is to make sure that they're just in the mix having fun. And that's where they're going to get their sense of mattering from.
I appreciate that. And continuing on the coaching aspect, You say in the book, athletes thrive by focusing on process over outcomes and judging effort, not just results. And I think every coach would agree, yes, that is optimal for the athlete experience. And yet we know that current athletes are often so focused on those outcomes because it's one of the ways that they are judged by other people. So, what actionable advice, Brad, would you give to coaches about how they can be intentional about starting to shift that focus with their athletes from outcomes to process?
So I think there's two things here that are really important. The first is to reward effort, not results as a coach. So it's one thing to say process over outcomes, but then only tell the athlete that you're proud of them when they play well. It's another thing to say you're about process over outcome. And when an athlete puts forth a good effort, regardless of the outcome, you praise and you reward that effort. So as a coach, your job is just, is the effort there? Is the execution there? And regardless of the scoreboard, you praise that effort. The second thing, and I think this is where coaches often go wrong, and I've gone wrong in the past too, is I think sometimes we over correct and we focus so much on process that we kind of like downplay the outcome. And that does a disservice to us and our athletes. And I think a more honest view is like outcomes do matter. And you do want to win, and we do want to win, and winning is important. And the higher up the food chain you go, winning is how people make a living in professional sports and in collegiate sports increasingly as well. So I think to say like process over outcomes doesn't mean that the outcomes don't matter. It doesn't mean that you can't feel deeply hurt if you lose after you've given it your all. It just means that the process and who you're becoming along the way matters too. There's a framework in the book, Infinite and Finite Games, that I just love. So a finite game has a start and an end and a winner and a loser. And the goal of a finite game is to win. And then an infinite game has no end. And the goal of an infinite game is just to keep playing. And at any point in time, an athlete is playing both these games. So there's the finite game, which is I want to win this baseball game at all cost. And then there's the infinite game, which is I want to develop as an athlete, or even better, I want to develop as a person. And your job as a coach is to help people play both those games at the same time. I think where we go wrong is where we just focus on the finite game. You just have to win this baseball game. But I think more, I don't want to say woo-woo coaches because I put myself in this category, but coaches like me, we sometimes focus too much on the infinite game. And the athlete's like, what the hell are you talking about? I want to win this baseball game. Come on, like, let's go. This does matter. And it's not either or, it's both and. And I think often now when I talk to athletes, I talk about great, like we're going to give our all to both these games. And when things are really clicking, we're winning both, right? We're winning baseball games and we're becoming a better athlete. We're becoming a better person. But even when we're losing baseball games, those experiences are still going to shape you as an athlete and as a person.
Okay, just a quick pause. If you're getting value from this conversation, I want you to know about the TOC coach community. It's free to join, jump in, connect with other coaches, and start learning. But here's the thing. If you're the kind of coach who wants to go deeper, who's committed to transformation, not just transaction, Premium Access gives you everything. All 12 courses, every live training, personalized consulting for your team when you need it. It's for coaches who don't just want to be good. They want to be the kind of leader their athletes look back on and say, that coach, they changed my life. If that's you, go to tocculture.com. We'll see you inside. Now, back to the episode with Brad. Yeah, there's so many external forces that are working against maybe our really well-intentioned, purposeful efforts as a coach to help them do that either or, to both care about outcomes, but also be committed to the process. And so you think about parents, you think about social media, you think about the things that they are actually rewarded for, which, in today's sports, there is a reward, financial reward, academic reward, all those types of things. So you have all those things. How can coaches address those external messages that they're getting? How do we, because right now I feel like sometimes I just put my head down and just go, well, I'm going to give my message here as a coach, ignore all that, ignore that. But like that doesn't seem to work for a lot of coaches, right?
Yeah. Well, okay. So I think that again, it depends on the level that we're talking about. So how I coach my kids' teams, and my kids are in youth sports, right? They're young, but I would continue this all the way through high school. Is at the start of the season, the players and the parents, we meet together as a team, and the parents get a really clear message. The kids get this message age appropriate, but the parents, the message is simple. Like I have 3 goals, right? Mastery, mattering, and the kids wanting to play again next year. And mastery means we're going to work on skill development. I want your kids to get better at the sport. And if I do a good job at the coach, they're going to get better at the sport. Mattering. I want your kids to feel like they are part of a team, right? One of the biggest problems with youth today is you've got young boys sitting alone in their basement on dark corners of the internet, getting crazy radicalized into insane ideas. And you've got women sitting on Instagram developing terrible body dysmorphia. Sports are such a good place to like provide an alternate and better path for youth. So I want your kids to be excited to show up and feel like they're part of a real team with real people in real life. And then my third goal is I want them to want to play again next year. So whether we win a championship or whether we lose, I want the kids to have a good enough experience where they're going to play again next year. And that is the expectation at the outset. And I tell parents that if you can't meet these expectations or you have a different vision, that's fine. I'm not judging you, but it's not going to be a good fit. Like you should find another team for your kids. Now, that works through middle school, maybe through high school, probably not. My kids aren't that old, so I'll find out the hard way. I think that as you get older, and excuse me, as the kids that you're coaching get older, then I think that you almost have to lean on the kids more because they're more mature, right? A 16, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old, you can tell them that, hey, you've got all these external forces. Maybe it's your parents. Maybe it's social media. Maybe it's the other people around you. And yes, you can want to impress those people and you can want to play well and you can want to get all that external validation and don't repress that, don't deny it, but it can't be the only thing. And at the same time, like, let's talk about what are your goals for yourself as a person and how can we work towards those goals through this sport? There's a chapter in the book on goal setting that I thought really hard about when writing this. And it's probably one of the chapters where I feel like I learned the most is I think when we set goals, like we should be thinking in terms of what's the outcome goal? I want to win a championship. I want to run a marathon. I want to deadlift 600 pounds. Then what are the process goals, right? I want to execute these workouts. I want to show up at practice. I want to develop these skills. And then what are the person goals? So I want to confront my fear of failure is a person goal. I want to feel what it's like to not be the best player on a team, but still contribute. That's a person goal. I want to develop self-confidence. That's a person goal. And I think a coach can go to a high school athlete or a collegiate athlete or even a pro athlete and define all these goals. So what's our goal as a team? Win a championship. What's our process goal? We're going to show up to practice. We're going to run this system, so on and so forth. And then what's your person goal? Like, what do you want to get out of this as a person? And hopefully the answer is not a bonus at the end of the year. And if it is, then you got to kind of push a little bit harder.
Brad, I love that because I'm thinking about all the coaches that I've worked with, all the teams I've been a part of, and we so often only focus on the outcome goals and the process goals. And maybe it's an assumption almost of, well, of course you'll develop as a person, as we go through and try to, be in pursuit of excellence related to these goals, but being intentional about, who do you want to be as a person? How do you want that person to show up in pursuit of these process and outcome goals? I think is an excellent question and one that I'm not sure coaches are consistently asking of themselves and of their players. And you mentioned this tension before with JP of, depending on the level that you're coaching, you have to prioritize certain goals because it relates to your livelihood and to, the impact that it will have on players' professional livelihoods, especially at the most competitive levels. In the work that you do, where do you find people often experience either the most tension or kind of paradoxes in what you teach?
I think it's at the professional level in many cases for the reason that you just said, where there's paychecks on the line. The external pressures are the highest. Depending on the sport and some of the higher profile sports, there's like an entire industrial complex around talking about a player's performance and talking about the sport. And I think that at that level, it is so important for the athlete and or the coach, or ideally both of them working together to develop a support group or a brain trust of people that can step outside of all of that hoopla and all of that noise and really come back to like the person at the center of this and making sure that we're never sacrificing the person. We're never sacrificing their soul. We're never sacrificing their health in a way that is going to be long-term detrimental. I think in the short run in pro sports, there's always trade-offs between performance and health, but there needs to be someone that can put the brakes on if it's going to have a long-term implication. And you really just have to have like people in your corner that you trust that have your best interest as the person. And that's really the most important thing for young athletes. Again, especially in the higher profile sports where there's just so much money to be made by so many people around you.
Yeah, and I love the emphasis that you put on the person part, and I know in the book, you talk about aligning actions with values, and that's a big part of the way of excellence. Can you share a story that you've experienced of a leader where you've seen this alignment in action?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so it's one of the coaches who I admire most. It's a highlight of my professional career was having him read the first draft of the book and then tell me that he actually thought it was quite good. Steve Kerr, coach of the Golden State Warriors. Um, their values on that team are around competing in joy. And if you watched the Golden State Warriors during Steve Kerr's tenure, you see a team that has won multiple championships, that has no problem laying it all on the line. You see a front office and a coaching organization that is willing to make really hard personnel decisions. And you see clips out of practice of Steph Curry taking full court shots, laughing harder than a 7-year-old boy at the gym. That team, the way that they practice, they are like a bunch of kids in a gym having fun. Um, Steve Kerr, back to values, back to why I admire him so much. He has said that when you are playing a basketball game, nothing else in the world matters other than winning that basketball game. That's it. That's the only thing that matters. But at the same time, that basketball game is completely trivial. And he feels like his job is to hold both those ideas at once and to teach these young men that he coaches to hold both those ideas at the same time. So he doesn't diminish the importance of the game. He doesn't just say, oh, it's just a game. You know, people are fighting wars. There's all these problems in the world. This is just a game. He says, no, when we step onto the court, that's the beauty of the game. All that other stuff melts away and we can just focus on winning. But at the same time, he keeps that perspective that it is just a game. And that's how the Warriors have been like this dominant, but also fun loving organization over the last 10 years. And something that I know that Coach Kerr does, and Mike Dunleavy Jr., the GM, another great leader, they're really intentional about what drives each one of those athletes, and they're making sure that they're working on person goals.
I love that response. When Betsy asked it, I was like, oh, Steve Kerr would be like one of those leaders I look at that really does that a good job of that. So it's cool to see he's got a lot of value out of your book, your new
I
book, The
love
Way of
Coach Kerr,
Excellence.
and that,
Yeah.
and I think it's important too when we talk about excellence, um, to have role models. So, like, I wanted to write an excellent book, and I'm gonna get chills down my spine saying it because it's still I feel like a kid in a candy shop. Like, pinch me. When I set out to write this book, I said that there are 3 people who I want to write this book for, and if by some crazy combination of the universe aligning, if they ever read this book, like, I want them to say, like, "That's pretty good. He got it." And my 3 people were Steve Kerr, Greg Popovich, and Jason Isbell. Jason Isbell is a recording artist, so the sports nerds might not know about him, but Steve Kerr and Greg Popovich. Um, in every chapter, how I went about my research, like it was held up against a bar, like might Steve Kerr find this interesting and valuable? And I think that that's my own version of excellence. And I think that's another, it's just an important point that kind of came up organically here is that I think it can also be really important when we think about values, because sometimes they're amorphous, they're hard to define. But you can ask a young athlete, like, who's an athlete that you really look up to, or who's a coach, or who's a performer that you really look up to? And when you take the field or when you step onto the court, do what you can to remember them and play in a way that you think would make that person proud.
Mm, I love that. I feel like maybe I set the bar a little bit lower for the book I'm currently writing. My 3 people are Elena, Kieran, and Connell, my 3 kids. And I'm like writing the book for them as an athlete. So I think I
In
have a
some ways,
better
that's a higher bar.
maybe it's a higher bar. I don't know. One of the ideas I've been playing around a lot with is even in my own exploration, the work I do with coaches, is this idea of like shifting from passion to purpose.
Mm.
Obviously, a lot has been written about that and said about how, purpose, Adam grants the world much more sustaining, much more joy, fulfillment out of that. And yet, what I see in some of the coaches I work with, and obviously many of the listeners to this podcast, I would say are very purposeful. They want to be transformational leaders. They want to have a great impact. And they've probably already been on maybe that arc that I went on as a coach which was, oh, I'm going to go coach my passion. And then we fall into that achievement trap. And then we have that kind of journey. And then we come out of that, we find our purpose. But then some of us, we start to almost like passion becomes an obsession when you fall in the achievement trap. I think sometimes purpose can fall into this unhealthy obsession as well. It's too, we can just be doing one thing after the other, coaching a million different teams, thinking that we're trying to save every kid that walks in our door. I don't know if you could speak to that, if you've seen purpose ever take a turn for the worse.
Yeah, I think that I have seen purpose take a turn for the worse. And I think that there's a couple times that this happens. The first is, I think, JP, what you're alluding to, which is when you almost get addicted to, like, being a savior or a martyr and like saving everyone, and like everything has to be so purposeful. And then you end up just burning yourself out so hard. Uh the second, and I think the I don't want to say more insidious, but it's not talked about as much, where purpose can be a trap, is most humans go through periods of life where they don't feel like they have a strong purpose, or they don't feel like what they're doing is meaningful. And then you have to either try to force purpose onto a state of mind where it doesn't feel too purposeful, or then you start judging yourself and you say, man, like I don't even have, like, my purpose isn't strong anymore. So then you take like a poor mood state and you make it even worse by judging yourself for having the poor mood state. So I too have been on this journey. The first book I wrote over 10 years ago, or what is it? Now it is 10 years ago, Peak Performance, co-authored with Steve Magnus. There's an entire section in that book on purpose. And I thought, like, you had to have purpose. And then a couple years later, I experienced my first depression, and I went for a year of life without having any purpose. And for the first 6 months of that year, it was a lot worse because I'm like, man, like I don't have purpose. Like now everything's wrong. And what I've realized since then is, like, sometimes we feel strong purpose and sometimes we don't. And purpose is kind of like an emotion. Sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're energetic, sometimes you're not. And when that strong purpose is there and everything's clicking, you want to lean into it and ride those waves, and it makes life great. But when the purpose isn't there, instead of freaking out or judging yourself, the framework that I like and what I come back to personally, what I introduce in this book, is just like values. Because I feel like values, they're not as lofty. You don't have to feel great. Like if your values are consistency, authenticity, integrity, family, whatever it is, like even if you feel like shit, you can show up and say like, all right, what can I do to act in alignment with these values?
Mm.
And then the purpose, it's kind of like process over outcomes. Like the process is just showing up in alignment with your values, even if you don't want to. Even if you feel like shit, show up, act in alignment with your values. And then the outcome that you're after is living a life on purpose. And just like in sport, sometimes you execute that process perfectly and you still don't win. Sometimes you live in alignment with your values and you still kind of feel like that purpose isn't there, but hopefully most of the time it is there. So for me, it's been a lowering of the bar from, it's not process driven, it's not purpose driven, it's values driven, because values are concrete. There are day-to-day actions that you can take, even when you feel like crap, to act in alignment with those values. And there's all kinds of psychology research that shows that by acting in alignment with your values, regardless of how you're feeling, you actually give yourself the best chance at feeling good as a result.
Yeah, just one thing on that real quick. Sorry, Bessie, is just,
You're good.
I love that, because I think there's so often when coaches are out there and they're whatever level they're coaching at, there are those days you're like, I don't feel like I'm getting through to my players at all. I think even as a parent, there's some days I'm like, have I been raising this kid? Because he's a monster. Like, I don't know if I like him very much today, right? And you're like, oh, you don't feel very connected to that purpose even as a parent. But I love this idea of just coming back to values. So thank you. All right, that's it for part one of our interview. The biggest thing that stuck out to me from this interview was values, like the importance of us coming back to our values. It made me think of Brene Brown in her most recent book, Strong Ground. Brad's book, The Way of Excellence, I have to say it is a fantastic one for you as a leader and a coach, and for your athletes. It's available now, so be sure to pick that one up. Also, you can download the notes, right, and the activities for you and your team by subscribing at tocculture.com to the weekly Team Culture Toolbox. Thank you again for everyone listening to the podcast. If you'd like to do us a favor and support the podcast, please just leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts and share today's episode with someone that might find it valuable.